Hello and welcome to this webcast. I'm Karen Koh at the 2009 Greener Skies Conference. In Bangkok this week, government negotiators are meeting to try to work out a new set of climate change targets for the world. By all accounts, the negotiations are not going well. But here in Hong Kong, the Asia-Pacific aviation industry is discussing some of the targets it has set for reducing its impact on climate change.
The first one is that between now and 2020, we're going to aim to improve the fuel efficiency of the industry by an average of 1.5% per annum. So between now and 2020, that adds up to roughly another 20% improvement in our fuel efficiency. So that's the first target for the short term. Then, probably the most crucial target is the 2020 target. We've committed that from 2020 we're going to cap our emissions. We're going to move to what we call carbon neutral growth, which essentially means that even if our traffic continues to grow, we're going to keep our emissions stable. And that is one of the key challenges we have. The third target is looking much further ahead, and that's out towards 2050, when we've committed to evaluate every way that we can to halve our net emissions by 2050 compared to where they were in 2005.
Between now and 2020, 1.5% fuel emissions efficiency target. I think that one is should be fairly easily achievable. But then when we talk about carbon neutral growth after 2020, that's quite a stretch. And then of course halving our emissions output by against 2005 levels by 2050. That is going to require a real leap.
Delegates at the conference represented airlines as well as airports, air traffic control authorities, and the people who make planes and engines.
Efficiency has always been at the heart of what we do. We've always looked to improve the efficiency of our aircraft, and that obviously has a direct impact on the environment as well.
Potential savings on carbon dioxide emissions are considerable if you are using the right sort of sustainable aviation fuels. And so we, Boeing and the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Users Group, are focused on is developing the supply chains and the sustainability foundation for those next generation of sustainable biomass energy sources.
Our proposition to our customers is all about being the greenest airline in the world. We fly mainly tourists coming to visit New Zealand, and they come to New Zealand because they see it as a very pristine environment, and we want the airline to reinforce that image to our passengers, and we believe biofuels is a big part of that. It can reduce our overall carbon impact by about 40% when you look at the full life cycle cost of the or production of the fuel. So we believe it's an integral part of the future for aviation.
But while the aviation industry is doing what it can to reduce emissions, it admits it won't be able to reach its targets without governments coming on board.
Well, I'd turn it around and say we're really trying to help governments. Governments have to set the policy framework on climate change, and what we're simply trying to do is volunteering what the industry can do, and it's a collective industry position.
We are part of the global problem, which is climate change. We're a global industry and we need global solutions. So what we're advocating is what we call a global sectoral approach to aviation, where our emissions are managed at the global level rather than trying to divide them up by countries, because the minute you start to try and do that for aviation, you run into problems in terms of who actually owns the emissions in which place.
We really need governments to set some targets to the manufacturers of the equipment that we use. Rather, as they've done for motor vehicles, for example, there are emissions targets which manufacturers have to make. We need governments to set stretch but achievable targets for our suppliers so that they can provide us with the equipment that we need, and so on. I mean, quite clearly, this is going to need a lot of government involvement and commitment and understanding if we're going to get it done.
The conference is also focused on the major global climate change talks scheduled for Copenhagen in December, and how the aviation industry might be part of the discussions.
Well, I think the new administration in the United States has made it clear that it does want to be part of a global push. We've heard statements from the leading developing countries, fast-growing countries like China and India, saying even though they were not pledged to emissions reductions in Kyoto, they are committed to improving energy efficiency. And I think we'll see an attempt to try and sketch out a climate change framework. But there are many, many details still to be ironed out, and negotiations are still continuing.
From this conference in Hong Kong, a number of delegates will fly to Montreal for a high-level meeting of the United Nations Civil Aviation Body. Aviation industry officials will urge the UN to adopt their targets for emission reductions. The question is whether governments can set aside their differences and meet the challenge the industry has set to provide some truly effective ways to reduce emissions.